For 25 years, nothing has tasted better after a hard day's work than a Mike's Hard Lemonade. It's because since day one, Mike's has been making lemonade the hard way. We use 3 kinds of lemons, all hand-picked from family farms, then blended to perfection and cold-pressed to create the epic hard lemonade you know and love. Mike's Hard Lemonade. Hard days deserve a hard lemonade. Mike's is hard, so is prison. Don't drive drunk. Premium malt beverage with flavors. All registered trademarks used under license by Mike's Hard Lemonade Company, Chicago, Illinois.
Here you are, BPMs high, sweat dripping, body moving, tongue panting. You're working hard, real hard, and you're thirsty. You need vitamins, nutrients for peak performance and energy. And your plants do too. Aw, I mean, just look at the little guy. Water-soluble plant food from Miracle Grow is full of essential nutrients. Just a little scoop into your watering can and boom, instant feeding and bigger, more beautiful plants. It's kind of like a sports drink for your plants. You may have to suffer from heat, but your plants do not.
You can support this podcast at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, a Scottish tourist appears to drown off California. Did he fake his own death to avoid criminal charges in the UK? We'll talk about the podcast series Dead Man Running from BBC Sounds. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of the Piper Green series of cozy mysteries, Laura Bricker. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Rebecca.
And finally, our resident Doubting Thomas, author of the City Trilogy of novels, host of Strange Arrivals, and our Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, Toby Ball. Hi, Toby.
Hi, Rebecca.
Kevin.
Yes.
This is Thursday's podcast.
It is.
Please tell us what is coming up on Monday's show.
On Monday, we're going to be talking about the new podcast series from Campside Media. It's called White Devil.
Oh, we've been looking forward to this one, right?
There's a whole story behind, I mean, I don't know if anyone really cares. But
I care. Tell us.
Well, I saw a press announcement for this podcast like a year and a half ago. I made a little index card. I put it up on the
Campside's first original podcast.
I put it up on my cork board and I was just waiting on it. And it kind of actually took it down through. I said, I must have mistaken it because White Devil sounds like something you could Google and podcast would come up. And this podcast never did. And then it came back and they pulled it back. And I know there's, sort of behind the scenes, there are a lot of machinations because
Journalism stuff,
legal stuff. And I think once we get into it, we'll understand why.
Yes. And I think that's like, Campside has made obviously a lot of original stuff, but it's like their own podcast, right? Like that's a whole thing around it too. Yeah. I'm really excited to hear that one. It's Josh Dean, I believe, right?
Yep.
One of our favorite reporters. Okay. Well, we'll look forward to that. In the meantime, though, we have something to talk about from another part of the world.
We do.
Should we get to it?
Well, you mean Colorado?
Yes. Colorado, California, Scotland,
Aruba, Bahama.
All right, I guess we should do it then.
All right, let's get to it and drop that first clip right now. Leading off.
I understand you didn't see him come out. Is it possible that he may have come out of the water and gone elsewhere?
I can't say.
This 911 call was made from one of the most dangerous stretches of coastline in California. And when I first heard that Kim might have drowned, I had so many questions.
In 2019, authorities in California searched the sea for Scottish tourist Kim Avis, who was last seen going for a swim. BBC journalist Myles Bonnar remembered Avis as an eccentric street vendor from his hometown. But American police believed Avis faked his disappearance to avoid criminal prosecution for sexual assault back in Scotland.
For a while, it looked like the police were getting so many leads and so much good information, they were bound to catch Kim. But then, the trail around the California coast went cold. Kim had fallen off the radar.
An international manhunt failed to turn up the fugitive. But 1,000 miles away, a Colorado woman was growing suspicious of her new friend with the indiscernible accent.
I said, well, let me see your passport. And he did just like a flip book.
the cartoon book, and he got mad, and he drove off for about an hour. And I'm like, this is strange. This is really peculiar. He's talking about a witch hunt. Something isn't right here.
In Dead Man Running from BBC Sounds, Bonnar recounts the search for Avis. It also does a deep dive into his life as a figure around town, the crimes he committed, and why it took years to bring him to justice. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from Dead Man Running. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. Now, Toby, we've got a guy who jumps off a jetty into the ocean in California, and his son reports him missing. And it turns out he may not be who he says he is, and we have a reporter who actually knows the guy because he worked at a coffee shop, and the guy used to try to come in and bum free coffee. What do you think of the setup for this podcast?
Awesome. I really, the first 2 episodes of this, I was like, this could be like a top podcast of the year. The reporting's good. The sort of tease about this guy just like kind of swimming off. And strangely, like with no wetsuit in the California ocean in, what was it, February or something? And his son's like, I'm going to go off for a hike for a few hours and I'll come back and see ya. And then how it gets called, going back to Inverness and how, the reporter knew him and used to serve him coffee and stuff. I mean, it's just, the setup was just spot on, I thought it really started off very, very strongly, and I was hooked at that point.
Yeah, Kevin, this isn't one of those ones where there's no reason for the reporter to be telling the story, right? Yeah, I mean, I do like stories with a legitimate connection between the host and the subject. Now, like, I also grew up in the same small town in Texas, or a similar place, I Wikipedia'd this, and I'm going to manufacture a reason why I'm doing the story. It's season 2, so we have to have a nebulous connection here. But is reporting about like how Kim, or Kem, as he sometimes went by, was, how he's kind of dismissed as this oddball vendor and a busker. He just sort of might be like overlooked and under-considered as somebody who was actually very dangerous. I try to place it, but there was something about like the story of an adult vendor and sort of like all these, I like how they refer to him as alternative teens. I was alternative back in the day, but sort of this, this guy who's like a Pied Piper to, kids sort of on the outside. Was he a Pied Piper or a groomer? I guess he was a groomer, right? Yeah, I guess that's a better way of using it. And all of his stuff about the ways he did this long-term coercive control and sexual assault of young women, it was quite disturbing. So we have this reporter, Myles Bonnar. Laura, what do you think about him as a host of the podcast?
Well, we know I love a Scottish accent, so right off the bat, I don't care what Myles says because but
you're like points.
Yeah, I think as a reporter and a journalist, he is what like my kind of reporter. He's a shoe leather reporter. He goes out, he tracks down people that knew this guy. He goes to the source. At one point later in this podcast, he goes out and like finds people that were arrested with this guy, goes out, hunts them down and like where they are now, knocks on their doors.
The reason I'm getting in touch was just to find out, what you remember of Kim Avis Gordon.
Is there something wrong with him?
Yeah, well, he's in prison, Cohen.
Is he dead? No.
He's not dead, he's in prison.
In prison? All right.
As a host, I appreciate this because it's not somebody that's just reading the script and that's been brought in to tell this story. This is somebody who's actually doing legitimate reporting in this story and has like those reporting chops.
Toby, can you talk about Kim as a character a little bit? Because we hear about him as this like busker type, right? But he also, he sort of has this like big house, and he's also kind of like glomming off of people. And as Kevin says, he's, Pied Piper or perhaps groomer type to the young people about town. I mean, do you sort of get the sense of like, this is somebody that we kind of know? I mean, I felt like as a teenager, maybe I knew somebody like this. I don't know. What do you think? Because it sort of rang weirdly true to me. And I feel like Myles kind of gets that across. Like this is not, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. First of all, I'm not so sure that the Pied Piper wasn't a groomer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That kind of feels like maybe that's what that story was about. Yeah, I mean, he kind of starts it off as like, every town's got this one guy who everybody kind of knows who they are and blah, blah, blah. In this case, Kim seems like a little more mysterious than most of those people, in that people don't really know where he came from. There's all this kind of speculation about how he like lived out in the woods for a while or whatever. And then they find out that he actually has got this like nice house overlooking Inverness. And it's like, how does he keep it going? Selling trinkets on the street. He projects this kind of, he calls it alternative personality, but you know, it's like somewhat transgressive, I guess, like somewhat outside the norms. And so there's like speculation, which Myles later kind of tracks down to his, like, he was in an early punk band in some place that I'd never heard of in Scotland. So I think it's an interesting combination of things that I think most people can relate to, in that I do think in most towns, or at least most towns that I've been in, there are one or two people who just seem to be around, right? And it's like, don't really know what their deal is, but you see them all the time. Everybody knows who they are. You don't really have to like try and explain who it is to people. They're like, oh, you know that dude who's, and they're like, oh yeah, of course. You know, the first two episodes of this are just really, really good. And I think it's a combination of this sort of making the story kind of familiar and then showing that it's actually not familiar, that what's going on here is not what's happening in your town. Like, this guy is a serious, you know, predator. He actually thinks that he's got some kind of weird identification with wolves, which they point out hunt in packs, and this guy does everything by himself. But regardless, I thought that was a really good setup. Again, it's like, here it is. It's a common thing. Most people can relate to it. And then bang, this is like the reality behind this particular one. It's like, this guy's got serious predatory instincts and is, you know, you have this one just horrific story, but understanding that this is played out in like probably more limited terms with other women.
Kevin, one thing I thought was interesting was that like this sort of tracks with the person that I think of as like this kind of person that, you know, lives in our town.
Whose name you just wrote down?
Yes. Who, by the way, is not like the kind of predator that is in this podcast, right? And did not ride into this town on a horse. But is the person that like everybody knows, and is the person that, you know, has some weird stuff that, you know, whatever. And is always like, how does this person have this even though they did that or whatever? Is that like, despite the fact that Kim Avis apparently is like a pseudonym, and there's been like a bunch of other names, under this name, he's been in the news like a bunch for like a bunch of things. And he has like this reputation for like being charitable and like doing all of these like swims and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it's like he's inserted himself in the public eye despite the fact that he's a bad actor.
Yeah. I found that part of his backstory to be quite interesting. You know, and if you've seen photos of him from his street vendor days, it was kind of like, oh, this is like one of those guys who would like sell tie-dye t-shirts at the state fair, you know, or something, like kind of grubby hippie, post-hippie looking, and you're like, okay, whatever. But it seems like he always did sort of want to be in the spotlight. I mean, from the days of, you know, being in this punk band. I mean, he's a busker, so, you know, he's really still tapping into his musician chops here to sort of like get on the street and look at me. I started to wonder if all of his efforts to be seen as somebody who's charitable and does like good things for people.
Allegedly does good things.
What?
Did he actually make that swim or not?
Probably not, but he did raise the money, or I suppose he did. I don't know. Hey, I'm going to swim Loch Ness. No, not the long way. The short way. Give me money.
It's still a decent swim.
It's still a decent swim.
I can't swim a mile.
But I started wondering, like, did he do those things because on some level he knew he was bad? Because sometimes that's how people sort of like try to come to terms with, you know, who they are and the evil things that they do. But in the end, I just kind of feel like now he's not that self-aware.
No, that's not why he did those things. He did those things so that people would think he was a good person because he was doing bad things.
That's what I just said. Didn't I just say that?
He didn't do it to make up for the fact that he was a bad person.
Okay.
He did it so that people would think he was, for the same reason why he would tape the arguments he had with women. Mm-hmm. That's why he would only tape them when they were arguing, so that later he could be like, see, it's called Darvo, you know, like, look, she's abusing me. Mm-hmm. It's like the Johnny Depp thing. She's abusing me. See, I have the audio. Like, it's like, that's what abusers do. That's what bad people do, is they make grand gestures of goodness so that everyone will think they're good when they're actually not good. And Laura, speaking of not good, we meet Jade and hear Jade's story. What did you think of that part of the podcast?
I feel like we have like the lead in that Toby talked about, but for me, this is where it takes off in terms of really understanding the depths of this guy's, he's a bad dude. And, we hear about Jade, who for years has been abused by him and finally is like at the point where she's going to report him and stand up. But it was just, hearing about how she was just really young and he comes out on the street and like kisses her in the middle of the street and she's never met anyone like him before. And he's old, but he's young. He's like one of us.
I remember him putting his hand down my top and I don't know why at the time I just thought that's very forward, but it wasn't something that I saw as like a red flag. I think because I was kind of young and naive.
It's like one of those textbook coercive control situations where then she's moved out to the caravan park and now she's isolated from everybody. And hearing about what she went through before she got to the point where she was like, okay, I am now going to leave and report him. And like, what was it, like 2018, 2019. So I think hearing just about years and years of her being under this guy's control, you're like, he was a master manipulator. He was a master abuser. And then hearing the way that he is then able to sort of spin himself wherever he is. But her story was particularly heartbreaking because she finally comes forward and then he goes on the lam. I felt like it was very compelling to hear from her and to hear what her journey had been like.
Yeah. Toby, it was an awful long journey for Jade. And I think what's interesting is hearing that like he was married when they first got together and then I guess his wife left him and then he moved her into his house. And then, like Laura said, sold the house and just went to the United States with this plan. But he also had a son who was, I guess, helping him execute the plan. Were you curious about sort of the son's role in here? Obviously, they weren't able to talk to the son, but I found myself really curious about that relationship as well.
Yeah. And first of all, they do make the point, I think in the last episode, that he says he married a hell of a lot of people. Like, I think one person's like, basically, if he slept with somebody, he said that he married them. So how legal that marriage was and how much he was just kind of living with this person, who knows? Yeah. The son, unless I missed something, you kind of never hear from him again.
Yeah.
He's there in episode 1 and I think he gets sent back to Scotland and then that's it, right? He's not there anymore. I can imagine it probably wasn't an easy upbringing with that guy as your dad. And so getting kind of talked into helping him disappear seems like it would have this sort of double function of showing your loyalty, but also getting him the hell out of your life. So it doesn't really surprise me. It seems like if you're acting in sort of rational self-interest, like that's not a bad move for that guy. But yeah, it's sort of, it is strange that he just sort of, again, like when you're making notes and stuff, it's like, oh, the son's helping him out. What's going to happen next with this kid? And then it's just, you don't hear about him again. He's a one chapter person.
Yeah.
Piggybacking on the son and the son's role in this, I'm like, we listened to about the cryptocurrency guy who was like, if you want to fake your death, you go to India and you get your fake, your fake birth certificate. I'm like, this is how not to fake your death. He sells his property. He goes to Mortuary Beach. Seriously, could you find a mortuary? And then he jumps in, but they're searching for him.
I don't think he ever got his toes wet, Laura.
Well, I'm saying he jumped in. That was in my yes. But then he's right away being cited all over the place. I'm like, dude, if you're trying to vanish, you maybe need to leave the state that you faked your death in. What is wrong with you? It's he has this elaborate plan, but then you look at it and you're like, okay. So no one's going to notice the guy with the accent who is now wandering all over the place. And the Monterey County Sheriff's Department is having sightings of him all over the California coast within a few days of his disappearance. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Get a van, get out of there.
Yeah. You can fake your death, but you can't fake great entertainment that you can get on Patreon.
That's true.
At patreon.com/partners in crime media.
I guess we're in the business section.
Get all sorts of exclusive podcasts. You get, between 18 to 20 plus podcasts. Exclusive podcasts this month. We're just cranking them out.
Way more than that
all
this
the
month.
time. Well, if you join us at the leading off level, you get exclusive podcasts like the Crime Writers on After Show. Find out about how Rebecca almost got her lights punched out at a family wedding. We got Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast, and we have Married with Podcast, which is our advice show. And Rebecca's also been throwing in some extra stuff here. She cannot stop talking about the Karen Reed murder trial.
I mean, it's my whole personality right now.
So we've been doing readathons about the Karen Reed trial. And also I'll let you know that starting in July, you're going to hear those episodes from season 1 of Other People's Problems. That's Rebecca's game show. Now, if you join us at the Bricker scale level, you also get an additional podcast. That's Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast. And if you join us at the Let's Do What We Do level, you can get all these episodes of Crime Writers on early and ad-free. You'd already know what our reviews are of Dead Men Running. And if you are a deep diver, you can watch and partake in Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club. The next book club will be discussing the book called The Brothers. And Toby, which brothers are referred to in this book?
Ben and Jerry.
Exactly. They weren't brothers.
The guys who own Jordan's
Rebecca.
Furniture.
No, it's actually Dzhokhar and Tamerlane Tsarnaev. Who were the brothers who carried out the Boston Marathon bombing. This is a book by Masha Gessen, who is professor at Amherst College, I think, and also writes for The New Yorker quite a bit. So it should be an interesting book, and some of the guests that I have got kind of interesting ties to the case. So it should be an interesting discussion.
Yeah, you can watch that live recording on July 11th and then stick around for the audio podcast that will come out. We also have an Amazon storefront where you can see some of our favorite things. Rebecca, what are this week's Amazon recommendations?
I really enjoy my Yeti tumblers an awful lot. As you know, they're my favorite kind of studio cups, and I like buying them on Amazon because they've got some fun-ass colors there.
And Toby, what are your listener-inspired deep cut recommendations?
I can't remember if I've done this one before. The Olaplex No. 9 Bond Protector Nourishing Hair Serum.
I love that shit.
No, I don't think so.
I love that shit.
I have no idea what that is, but
Number 9?
Sounds weird.
I use it and I fucking love it.
Number 7 sucks. Number 9 apparently is the bomb.
Yeah.
Number 9's my jam.
And then they went to number 10 and they said, no, let's go back. That other one was good.
Too much.
Yeah, it's too far.
You think this shine comes from nowhere? It comes from the number 9, motherfucker.
Oh, I was going to do 1, but now I see the one that's right below it, and it's pretty weird. Abe's chocolate chip mini muffins, and then in parentheses it says in capital letters, frozen eaches.
Ooh.
I don't even know what that means.
Oh, frozen eaches.
It's like peaches, but without the P.
To each is his own.
Yeah.
Don't want your eaches, don't go shaking my tree.
Yeah.
All right, you can shop us first. Start at amazon.com/shop/Crime Writers On. We earn commissions on qualified purchases.
Yes, we do. Shop at amazon.com using our link. All right, Kevin, before we end the business section, I have to ask, do we have any Patreon patron saints of the week this week?
Our Patreon patron saints are Laura Case and Vicky Fleming. Bless you.
Bless you, Laura. Bless you, Vicky. Thank you so much for joining us on Patreon. Thanks for everybody who's joined us there, especially our new members who've joined to hear our Karen Readathon updates. And everyone who's been there
is fundamental.
Everyone who's been there for a long time. People just want to hear us talk about Trupa Procta. And for everybody who just listens to the business section anyway, I really appreciate you because all of our listeners matter to us so, so much. So, Kevin, does that end the business section?
Thus ends the business section.
I'm going to go ahead and fade that music out right now. So, Kevin, who's sponsoring the podcast this time around?
Well, it's our friends from Quince.
Ooh, oh my God.
The weather's getting warmer. Time to ditch the jackets and sweaters and shorts and tees. Just get ready for summer. Why waste money on clothes that will only last one season?
Why? Why do it?
Why do it? Go to Quince.
Kevin, did I not just buy you the best shirt?
Yeah, no, it's funny because I have here this first bullet point. Quince has all of the seasonal must-haves like
linen shirts.
100% European linen shirts from $30.
I literally just bought you a European linen shirt from Quince.
It was wonderful. It fit great. It held up great in the wash.
Yeah, I love my linen shirts from Quince. Love them.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to wear it all summer long. And you wonder, how do they get things like at these great prices? You should rest assured that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices along with premium fabrics and finishes. And you look good AF.
Upgrade your wardrobe. Go to quince.com/crime for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/crime to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/crime.
Crime.
Okay, Kevin, so who's our next sponsor in this podcast?
We're sponsored by Shopify.
I know them.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about like sleuthing partners that get things done, like Frank and Joe.
Oh, yeah, Frank and Joe.
Who? Frank and Joe who?
I don't know who Frank and Joe are.
The Hardy Boys.
Oh, please. That was a boys' book.
Okay.
I don't want to be gendered, but come on.
All right, what about Bess and George?
Oh, they were Nancy Drew's friends?
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. They got it done. How about Holt and Steele?
From Remington Steele?
Yeah, what were their first names?
Remington.
Steele.
And Stephanie?
Stephanie Zimbalist was Laura Holt.
I don't know.
Yeah, talk about perfect partners when it comes to solving crimes, but what about the perfect partners when it comes to growing your business? That's you and Shopify. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Whether you're selling sleuthing supplies or marketing mystery merch, maybe it's those online courses for cat detective school. Shopify will help you sell everywhere.
Kevin, if you ever bought anything online, Shopify is everywhere.
Yeah, it is. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system, wherever or whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. And Shopify helps you turn, that even includes like out the back of your mystery machine.
That's right.
You can sell the swag. And Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout.
Sign up for a $1 a month trial period at shopify.com/crimewriters.
Crime Writers.
That's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/crimewriters.
Crime Writers.
Now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/crimewriters.
Crime Writers.
For 25 years, nothing has tasted better after a hard day's work than a Mike's Hard Lemonade. It's because since day one, Mike's has been making lemonade the hard way. We use 3 kinds of lemons, all hand-picked from family farms, then blended to perfection and cold-pressed to create the epic hard lemonade you know and love. Mike's Hard Lemonade. Hard days deserve a hard lemonade. Mike's is hard, so is prison. Don't drive drunk. Premium malt beverage with flavors. All registered trademarks used under license by Mike's Hard Lemonade Company, Chicago, Illinois.
All right, time to talk about Angie.
Angie.
I love Angie.
Kevin.
She's kind of an odd duck, right?
In what way?
Well, you know, just have haggis for breakfast. I don't know. She
sells rocks.
She sells rocks.
She
Yeah.
carries a gun.
She's a little
she's a money
evasive. Thief. She's definitely a character, and she knows that she is, but she was sharp enough to drop a dime on Kim. You know, it's like, I'm starting to get a bad feeling about this guy with the weird passport and everything like that. But she eventually gave Myles an interview, and so I think that was good, because that would have been kind of a lame aspect of the story to not get that part of the Kim Avis story.
I have so many questions for Angie, okay? Angie sells rocks by the side of the road. Angie has $25,000 in a belt bag, probably some of the money that she literally stole from Kim's son. I mean, she says she basically sold his stuff and kept the money, and the money that she was given that belonged to him, she kept a bunch of it instead of sending it to the son, and the son says he received none of it. And she was sleeping with him, apparently. She doesn't say that explicitly, but the fact that she doesn't want to say it, I think she was. And she was in a hotel room with him. You know, when he asked her the question, she doesn't want to talk about it.
He wanted to get a hotel, and at first they told him to come here to Manitou Springs, but they didn't have any rooms available. And so I said, come down here. This is the hotel I stayed in when I first came to Colorado Springs. And so he got the room.
And the manhunt continued too.
She liked the wolf howl before sex.
Yeah, and then, why she ended up wanting to run the plate, that's sort of in question. It makes me wonder if he did something to her, but she says, she keeps saying, like, what did she say? I'm a tough one. I'm not scared. I'm a wild one. Mm-hmm. Like it makes you think she has a real like hard shell, which usually is actually kind of concealing a really vulnerable person. But she's
Well, I saw a picture of her.
Well, talk about Angie, Lara.
Yeah, well, I looked up Angie because I was curious, and there was a picture of her, I don't know, maybe in the Daily Mail, my favorite UK tabloid.
The Guardian.
I enjoy the Daily Mail myself.
Oh, okay, all right.
It was a picture of her visiting him. I don't know how they had this, but it was like, it just showed like the front on. And yeah, no, she's somebody that looks like she spent a lot of time outdoors. She had that sort of like hardened outdoor sort of look. But I appreciated about her is that she was getting suspicious. And obviously she knew about his tattoo on his back. So I think she's seen him naked. But she was talking about how he was throwing He was throwing money around. He was buying everybody food. He told her he was a U.S. citizen. And she's like, let me see your passport. And that's when he gets mad and goes away. And that's when, her suspicion starts to increase. Then they take him. And by the way, there's also the video out there of him getting arrested, which is fun. And everything is in her name. She takes the money from the van sale, but she continues to go visit him and then goes to visit him in Scotland when he's in jail in Edinburgh. Then finally she says, I'm like going to let you in on a little secret. You know what? I'm the one who turned your plates in. And he's like super pissed. And she's like, well, you lied to the wrong American girl. And I'm like, I wouldn't fuck with Angie, but it is intriguing to me. I'm intrigued also. Like, how does one make a living selling rocks on the side of the road? Like, there's so many questions.
I think it's easier when you've stolen a bunch of money from somebody that.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe they were more the same, but she won this round.
Yeah, her living expenses are probably not that high. I mean, I always have questions too when I see people when we travel, like, somebody with a van like selling like macrame plant holders or whatever that they've made, and I'm like, that's it.
Coco Frio.
That's what you do, and you seem fine. You have a super nice car. Like what? Like you're also selling drugs, right? 100%. Like that's what I'm sort of wondering about, Angie. No, it's a theory, Angie. I'm not accusing you of anything, by the way.
It's a theory.
Toby, what were your impressions of Angie? I mean, I know that in my opinion, the podcast sort of like the middle part of the podcast started to like slow down a little bit when we meet Angie, but what are your impressions there?
Yeah, I thought episodes 3 through 5 were pretty slow. Yeah, with her, like I can see where for Kim, like thinking I'm going to escape to America and just lose myself in this huge place, and I'll go into California and the Rockies and like these sort of vast places where, I mean, I think you could assume that you could just get lost and nobody will find you and you can just kind of live out your life on the margins, because that seems to be what his plan was. But he ran into someone who was enough on his wavelength to kind of see through him, I think. And like that was his mistake. Like he tried to BS somebody who's a BSer, I think, and she saw through him, and that was kind of it for him.
I agree with you. And I think you actually, I mean, I'll just say the United States is different than the UK in one big way. They have cameras fucking everywhere. And we do not. We have cameras at Easy Pass drive-through things. That's where we have cameras. And we have cameras. People have Ring cameras, right? But we don't have
CCTV
and facial recognition shit like fucking everywhere. And like they can follow somebody who leaves a store and be like, there they are, there they are, there they are, there they are. And there are places like when I just went to Montana, I realized like you could live here and like not see somebody for a week, like pretty fucking easily. And there, I think Colorado is probably a place like this. I mean, there's a lot of places I think like this where you could live off the grid, and people who don't watch, the kind of media where they do a story about somebody like him having faked his own death, or even if they did, people who don't want to have interactions with the police and wouldn't turn you in. Like there are a lot of places like that in the United States. I think I actually disagree with you, Laura. I think his plan was actually way more successful than it should have been.
Okay.
Until he fucking met Angie.
Okay.
I mean, the U.S. Marshals were fucking looking for him, and they had really good clues that didn't work.
Yeah, and this wasn't like 30 years ago, like Runaway Joe.
This was like 2 years ago.
It is in the digital
okay.
digital era. Yeah. So
did you see Nomadland? Did you ever see that movie?
Those van people.
My sense was like that was kind of like the plan, sort of. It's just live like that, right? You're
become a van person.
You're not going to interact with the government very much.
Go on the Appalachian Trail, or go on like the Pacific Coast, whatever it is, Pacific Coast Trail or whatever. Like you don't have to see. I mean, especially see it cash. Cash can beget cash. Like it's, I don't know.
Don't talk to those gem sellers.
Don't talk to the gem seller who's packing heat and like is definitely going to steal from you the minute that she can. All right. So I want to talk about the episode that I think is the slowest here. And unfortunately, I think it's like where we get like the most like sensitive information and probably you're supposed to feel the most for the victims. And that's the trial episode. Kevin, why are trial episodes always so slow?
Well, I mean, often the focus on the trial is necessary in most true crime discussions, and it just ends up really just slowing the narration down. It turns like the subject of the podcast or the novel or whatever this person who's out actively doing stuff, it turns them into a passive figure, and the world really revolves around them. At least in this case, they held back a lot of sort of the details that we would learn at trial or in the trial episode. It isn't repeating a lot of the stuff that we already knew. But this was kind of my least favorite episode, only because there was so many sort of out of the ordinary and usual things going on. It ends up making a trial look pretty pedantic.
Kim was shaking his head throughout the testimony, but especially when it came to talking about his violence, throwing things, hurting himself. There was a lot about him banging his own head, and the police actually testified that he was covered in white scars, which they believed were cuts from historical cuts that had healed up over time.
Toby, you thought this episode was pretty slow in terms of the pace of the podcast too, right?
I get it in that you want to do right by the victims and allow their voices to be heard, even if they're voiced by actors. But there's a certain sameness to their stories, which, and they talk about how that's important in Scottish law, but you're just hearing it again and again. Yeah, there's no suspense. At the end, I guess you're wondering if he's going to be convicted or not. But otherwise, it's just kind of hearing these horrible stories one after the other. And you're like, yeah, this guy's a monster. There's no way around it. And it's not, I don't think it's minimizing each victim's story or experience to say that sort of lining up one after another just feels like a little much. And just a little bit the same in all this. And I was glad that the next episode, they ended up finishing, I thought, pretty strongly. I'm glad this wasn't the last episode.
Yeah.
I think that would have been a bummer because I think in general, it deserved a better ending, which it gets.
I agree. So I will just say it is really hard to listen to trial episodes unless there's a reason why we're listening to the trial episode, because the trial was so unusual or narratively important or surprising or something. Because the reason that we heard the trial episode here was to find out about these other victims and what happened to them. There's a way to give us...
And Myles went to the trial.
Yeah, but there's a way to give us that information without saying and then this person said this, and then this person said this. He was able to tell us the stories of other things that happened in an efficient way that didn't have to be the verbatim testimony of these women, right? It just didn't. I mean, we heard other stories about other people in the podcast that way. And it's just narratively definitely sort of bogged down. I mean, we found this when we were writing about trial stuff.
Yeah. I always struggled with that chapter of the true crime book because it's and that was when I got feedback from people. They're like, this chapter's so boring. Why did you put this stuff in? I'm like, because you have to have the trial chapter. Yeah. And it was boring because you're basically looking at transcripts and trying to recreate it and make it sound interesting.
Yeah.
Because trials are unexpectedly challenging to a narrative for those reasons. And so sometimes it gets pulled off well, but sometimes it's you feel like you need this in order to wrap up the story. Because, I mean, obviously you want to hear that the guy got convicted or that the lady got acquitted or whatever, but they are often seen as necessary, and they most likely are, but it's very hard to execute that in a way that maintains an interesting narrative flow.
This might sound contradictory to people who don't know what the Karen Reed trial is and hear that we're actually talking about a trial in our Patreon. That trial is not this. That's why we're talking about it, because it's extraordinary and it's not this. That's a trial where every single day is a Perry Mason. It
reveals new things.
Yeah, it's like a Perry Mason trial. Every single day. It's a holy shit moment.
Right. And whereas I think it was Toby who just said, in a way, it's predictable in the sense that, you want to hear these stories, but there's a sameness to them. So it's important as a matter of law. It makes it challenging as a matter of narration.
Right. So, Laura, finally, we hear a sort of tracking down of childhood people from somebody who had many, many aliases. What did you think of that sort of detectivery in this podcast?
Detectivery. Well, as a detective to detecting.
As an actual detective.
As an actual detective. I love that part because it's this isn't the first time he's changed his identity. You hear about the band that he was in and his charisma in that band. He's got this sort of, I'm going to just say narcissistic cult leader personality. But then we have our host / actually good reporter who goes out, finds the newspaper article where he was arrested with a bunch, because we're always like, did he really get in trouble? Did he not get in trouble? Like, what's the actual story about what this guy did? And he finds out he went to this King Edward grammar school. And so he goes to the school, and then it's a nice looking school. It's looking like, oh, this doesn't look like a sketchy place. But this is also 40 years ago. Do you know how hard it is to find people from 40 years ago? Then he finds this one teacher who actually remembers him. So that was like, if I was
says something.
Which says something. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Because as somebody that's an investigator and has worked as a journalist, like that's always so exciting when you find somebody who actually, you're like, oh, yes. And remembers him as being like, again, stereotypical, a loner, a bit of a rebel. Doesn't remember him being in any trouble, but remembers him sort of becoming punk, like as it was sort of, just starting. And that he could tell at that point, even that he felt sort of trapped by confines of what was expected of him. So I thought that was really interesting background, even though it does sort of fit the profile of a lot of people that we talk about. But the fact that he went out and found this teacher was pretty amazing.
Yeah. And the other fact that I learned is that in Scotland, the haircut that we used to sort of offensively call the mohawk is offensively called the Mohican. So there's that. That was a fun little detail.
Stop by Sherwin-Williams and get 30% off Super Paint products and Super Deck stains from June 14th through the 24th. It's the perfect time to transform your space with color. Whether you're looking to revamp your bedroom, living room, or home office, we have you covered with bold hues, soothing neutrals, and everything in between. Shop the sale online or visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
For 25 years, Mike's has been making lemonade the hard way. Mike's Hard Lemonade. Hard days deserve a hard lemonade. Mike's is hard, so is prison. Don't drive drunk. Premium malt beverage with flavors. All registered trademarks used under license by Mike's Hard Lemonade Company, Chicago, Illinois.
Eddie Murphy is back as Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F. He's rejoined by familiar faces like Judge Reinhold and John Ashton as Rosewood and Taggart, along with new characters and new hijinks.
I didn't realize that you couldn't really fly helicopters.
Watch Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F. only on Netflix, July 3rd. Rated R.
Hi, it's Martha Stewart. I spend a lot of time thinking about dirt. At 3 a.m., at all hours of the day, really. What people don't know is that not all dirt is the same. You need dirt with the right kind of nutrients. New Miracle Grow organic raised bed and garden soil is so dense, so full of nutrient-rich, high-quality ingredients. Miracle Grow is simply the best.
All right, let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out the podcast, Dead Man Running from BBC Sounds? Laura, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for this podcast?
I am going thumbs sideways. I liked the beginning of this podcast, and then I felt like it got kind of boring. I love any sort of international fake death story. I love the BBC. I thought it was really interesting that they were able to track the path of Wolfman as he was kind of in the US and going back to Scotland. And we had a lot of good voices, and I just felt like narratively, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And then I was like, and now it's not as interesting. So a thumb sideways. That's my vote.
Toby Ball, thumbs up or thumbs down for Dead Man Running?
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because I think episodes 1 and 2 and like somewhat to a lesser extent, episode 6, I think are all really top notch. Like if all 6 episodes had been like that, I would have been a huge thumbs up. But I do think in 3, 4, and 5, for different reasons, it kind of slows way down. I don't really have much of a prescription of how to save it. You might have been able to condense 3 and 4 a little bit, and 5, I don't think it's a giveaway to say it's like a quart heavy episode. So what do you do with that? When some of it's great and then some of it's not so good. So I'll give it a thumbs up. I mean, I think the craft, especially in the first 2 episodes, is just excellent. I mean, it's really sort of, I feel like a great example of how to start a podcast. I think the problem was once it moved on, that stuff wasn't as compelling. And I think that maybe what was there wasn't used in the most compelling way. And then it comes back at the end, and I think recovers nicely in the end. So anyway, I give it a thumbs up, but it's more uneven than most thumbs up I give. But I think the highs are higher than most, just general thumbs up, and the lows are lower.
Kevin Flynn.
Yeah, I'm also a thumbs up. While this one may not be revelatory, this podcast is a real, nuts and bolts true crime investigation. There's a little bit looking forward, a little bit looking back, a little bit in present time. The host is good. And this podcast is an outgrowth of his TV documentary. Picked it up from the email address at the end, but I believe the name of the program is Disclosure. He talks about this in the podcast where they did a documentary, and then this sort of continues on, retelling the story in podcast form, but also advancing the story based on things that came out of the documentary. So I think it's a good example of how a podcast can supplement another investigation or another piece of media. We did do something not too long ago from RTE called Runaway Joe, and while that fugitive story was far more complex, I think that this one from BBC Sounds does a better job of sort of telling the story and keeping me engaged in that narrative, although I don't think it sort of answers all the questions. I'm a little more curious about what made this guy tick, but in any event, I thought that this was well told.
Yeah, I'm a mild thumbs up. I did think it started super strong, and I suspect the parts we really liked are sort of the parts that the documentary had, and that the lesser liked parts are the extra stuff. Mm-hmm. The middle being so slow is really holding me back from being more enthusiastic about this. But that being said, I really like Myles a lot. One thing that I really wish I had was more of him. The field tape, by the way, I loved his field tape. I loved hearing him reporting in the field. I would have loved a little bit more of that. And I would have loved a little bit more of him reflecting on his experiences with this guy and his experiences with the people he talked to. We had a lot of recreations and stuff, which we had to have. But he's also so good in the field and he's so good with people. And I would have loved to have heard just a little bit more of him, which I think that would have maybe helped. Less recreation, less this happened and this happened and this happened, and just a little bit more punchy Myles stuff. So yeah, mild thumbs up for me for Dead Man Running. All right, that's going to do it for us. But before we go, Laura Bricker, I got to ask, do we have a cat of the week this week?
Rebecca, we have your favorite thing. We have a dog of the week.
All right.
This comes from Teresa Kramer.
All right. Hi, Teresa. I know her.
Yeah. Teresa would like to nominate her current foster dog for cat of the week. Blink is just under a year old and needs someone with more training experience to turn him into the next canine star. Not only does he look like Benji, Toto, the Tramp, or Sandy, he is very smart and quickly learning simple things like to sit for attention, how to stay. But here's the best part.
All right.
He is the only dog to ever come through our yard who cares about the jolly ball.
Ooh.
He desperately wants the other dogs to play with the jolly ball. They shun him. If you have a dog that wants to play with a jolly ball, please contact Paws Rescue League to apply for Blink, who loves the jolly. And there's a really nice picture of Blink with the jolly ball.
Blink sounds a little bit like a Wheaton Terrier. I'm just going to throw it out there. All right, Laura Bricker, folks want to reach out to you and pitch their fosters to be pet of the week. How can they find you online?
At Laura Bricker on Twitter and Instagram.
Tell me about folks want to reach out to you and ask you, why do you hate the Astros so much? How can they find you online?
Do your own research first, but then you can reach me at TobyBallNH.
Kevin Flynn, what about you? How can you be found?
We had a whole podcast we talked about. I think it's called The Game. It was good.
That's right.
Yeah.
What about you, Kevin? How can you be found?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
And if you want to follow me everywhere online, you can find me at Reb Lavoie. Follow the show everywhere, Crime Writers On, but mostly I encourage you to join our incredible Facebook community and our Facebook discussion group. Even if you haven't been on Facebook for a while, rejoin. Join our group. It's fucking awesome. Get episodes early and ad-free, plus our Karen Reed updates at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media. You'll also get everything else we make back there. So much good stuff. Our theme song was composed and performed by Tyler Gibbons. Our editor is the wonderful Livy Burdett. The executive producer of this program is Kevin Flynn. This show was recorded in the Treehouse Yoga Studio above the Mockingbird Cafe in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, otherwise known as Studio C, the Closet, in our New Hampshire basement, where we also neatly fold our clothes before swimming in the very cold ocean. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you later.
I'm thinking of those. You guys remember when you'd go to Storyland or Santa's Village and they had the little place where you would mine for the gems?
Yeah.
I could see Angie and Wolfman doing that. Selling them, putting them in a bag.
Not if I'm taking my kids there.
You just reminded me of those like coin things. When you're a kid, you put it in and then it like makes the flat coin.
Yeah.
With the thing on it. And,
Yeah.
and you think that's awesome. And then like somebody in your family always reminds you like, you just ruined money.
Right. You just paid $1 to ruin a penny.
Partners in Crime Media.
They say plants like music. Yeah, no, like really, they respond to the vibrations of it, which means that this playlist you're listening to, the plants are too. You know what else plants like? Organic soil from Miracle Grow. It's made with all the best stuff like wood fiber and compost. Plus, it's OMRI certified organic, which officially means it's made with superior ingredients. And when you give your plants the stuff that makes them happy, they won't judge you on your iffy playlist. Hear that, plants? So go ahead and give them Miracle Grow.